That fat hippopotamus disgusts me. I'm only in it for her fortune. I stood frozen in front of the bedroom door, my hand hovering over the doorknob. My husband Michael's voice drifted through the gap, casual and cruel, as if he were discussing the weather. The words fell on me like stones, each one heavier than the last. You should see the way she eats, Mom. It's repulsive. He continued, and I heard his mother, Margaret, make that sharp, dry sound I had come to recognize over the past 3 years. My name is Eleanor, and I'm 34 years old. I was standing in the hallway of the house I bought with my own money in an upscale neighborhood in Chicago, Illinois, listening to my husband describe me as if I were something he'd scraped off the bottom of his shoe. The marble floor was cold beneath my bare feet, and I remember thinking how strange it was that I wasn't crying. I wasn't even angry yet. I was just numb. "When are you going to get access to everything?" Margaret asked, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that still reached me clearly. "Soon," Michael replied. "I've been patient for 3 years. The prenup expires in 6 months. And then I can file for divorce and take half of everything. Maybe more if I play my cards right." I took a step back, slowly, carefully, making sure the floorboards didn't creak. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. But my hands were steady. I walked back down the hall to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and sat on the countertop. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, making everything look warm and golden, normal, as if my world hadn't just shattered. I had met Michael 4 years ago at a real estate development conference in Miami. I owned a successful development firm that I built from scratch after my father died and left me a small inheritance of $20,000. I had turned that $20 into a multi-million-dollar empire through careful investments, smart partnerships, and 16-hour workdays. Michael had been charming, attentive, interested in everything I had to say. He won me over with romantic dinners and long talks about our dreams. He proposed after 8 months, and I was so happy I cried for an hour. Now, sitting in my kitchen, I realized every moment had been an act. Every kiss, every whispered, "I love you." Every time he held me close had been a lie. He was just counting down the days until he could take what I'd built and walk away. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Michael appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face breaking into that warm smile I once thought was genuine. He was handsome, in a common sort of way, with brown hair and blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Margaret followed him, tall and thin, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun. She gave me the same look she always did, as if I were something unfortunate she had to tolerate. "Hey, honey," Michael said, crossing the room to kiss my cheek. "We were just talking upstairs about maybe going out for dinner tonight. What do you think?" I looked at him, and I felt nothing. That was the strangest part. 3 minutes ago, I would have felt love, or at least what I thought was love. Now there was just an empty space where those feelings had been. "Actually, I'm not feeling well," I said, my voice coming out steady and calm. "You two should go. I think I'll just have some soup and go to bed early." Margaret's eyes lit up with poorly disguised pleasure. "Oh, what a shame. Well, we wouldn't want your reservation to go to waste. Come on, Michael." I watched them leave. I heard the garage door close, heard Michael's car pull away. Then I sat in the silence of my beautiful house and allowed myself to feel it. The betrayal, the humiliation, the rage that was beginning to build in my chest like a wildfire. For 3 years, I had cooked his favorite meals, even as he complained about my weight. I attended his mother's unbearable dinner parties, where she criticized everything from my clothes to my career. I supported his failed business ventures, writing checks without complaint. I believed him when he said he was working late. And it had all been a lie. The next morning I woke at 5:30 a.m., same as always. Michael was still asleep beside me, his face peaceful and innocent in the dawn light. I got up silently, dressed, and went down to my home office. I made coffee. I opened my laptop and started making lists. I had built my business through careful planning and attention to detail. Every successful project started with a solid plan, clear objectives, and meticulous research. This would be no different. If Michael thought he could play me and walk away with everything I'd worked for, he had seriously underestimated who he was married to. The first thing I did was pull all our financial records. I had always managed our money because Michael claimed he wasn't good with numbers. Now I understood that had been strategic. He wanted me to think he was harmless, even incompetent, while he waited for his chance. We had a prenuptial agreement that I had insisted on before the wedding. My lawyer drafted it to protect my existing assets and my business. The agreement stated that everything I owned before the marriage remained solely mine. However, there was a clause I had agreed to at Michael's request. After 5 years of marriage, the prenup would be dissolved and we would convert to a standard marital property agreement. At the time, I thought it was romantic, a sign that I trusted him. Now I realized it was the trap he'd been setting all along. We were 3 years and 4 months into the marriage. In another year and 8 months, everything I owned would become shared property, and he could divorce me and walk away with half. I pulled up the deed to our house. I'd bought it 2 years ago for $3 million. It was in my name alone, protected by the prenup. My business was valued at approximately $10 million, also protected. I had investment accounts, retirement funds, and a stock portfolio that totaled another $5 million. Michael had contributed nothing. He had worked sporadically at his brother Robert's insurance brokerage, but he'd quit 6 months ago, claiming he wanted to focus on his own ventures. I had supported that decision. I had supported everything. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the numbers on the screen. $18,200,000. That's what 3 years of fake love was worth to him. My phone buzzed with a text from my business partner, Valerie Cole. She wanted to discuss a new development opportunity in downtown Chicago. I'd known Valerie for 12 years. She was my first major client when I was just starting out, and we'd formed a partnership 5 years ago. She was smart, ruthless in negotiations, and had never judged me for my weight or anything else. I texted back, "Can we meet today? Something important has come up." She responded immediately, "Lunch at the bistro, noon." I spent the next few hours going through every document, every account, every asset. I made copies of everything, saved them to an encrypted drive, and backed it up to a secure cloud server. Michael slept until 9, then came downstairs in his pajamas, yawning and scratching his chest. "Morning, babe," he said, kissing the top of my head as he passed. "You're up early." "Busy day, just getting some paperwork in order," I said, not looking up from the screen. He poured himself some coffee and sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through his phone. "I'm meeting Rob for a round of golf this afternoon," he said. "Is that okay with you?" Robert was his younger brother, the one who employed him when he bothered to work. I'd always found Robert shallow and slightly dishonest, but I tolerated him because family was important. Now I wondered if Robert was in on it, if they laughed about me together, the rich, fat, stupid woman who fell for the act. "That's fine," I said. "I have a business lunch anyway." "Oh yeah? Who with?" "Valerie. Just work stuff." He nodded, already bored with the conversation. That was another thing I'd noticed over the years. He only paid attention when we were discussing money or when other people were watching. In private, he treated me like furniture. I used to tell myself it was just the comfortable silence of a long-term couple. Now I understood it was contempt. I left at 11:30 and drove to the Bistro, a small restaurant near my office downtown. Valerie was already there, sitting in our usual booth in the back. She was 52, with short salt and pepper hair and piercing green eyes that missed nothing. She stood when she saw me and pulled me into a quick hug. "You look tense," she said as we sat down. "What's going on?" I told her everything. The conversation I'd overheard, the prenup trap, the realization that my entire marriage had been a scam. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing harder with every sentence. When I finished, she sat back and took a long drink of water. "That absolute bastard," she said finally. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I said. "But I have to move fast. I have 1 year and 8 months before the prenup expires. If he files for divorce after that, he gets half of everything. And you know how these things go. He'll claim he supported my career, that he sacrificed his own opportunities. He'll paint me as the cold-hearted businesswoman who neglected him." "So you need to file first," Valerie said. "Maybe. But I keep thinking about what he said, about being patient for 3 years, about playing his cards right. He's been planning this from the beginning, Valerie. The entire relationship was fake." "Then you make sure he gets exactly what he deserves," she said, "which is nothing." We talked through lunch, brainstorming options and strategies. Valerie had gone through a brutal divorce 10 years ago and knew every trick in the book. By the time we finished eating, I had the outline of a plan. That night, I acted as if nothing had changed. I made dinner, a roasted chicken with vegetables that I barely touched. Michael ate heartily, talking about his golf game and some investment opportunity Robert had mentioned. I nodded and smiled and pretended to care. He didn't notice the difference. He never noticed anything about me. Margaret called during dinner. Michael put her on speakerphone, and I listened to her complain about the drama at her gardening club while I cleared the dishes. She didn't ask how I was. She never did. When Michael finally hung up, he stretched and yawned. "I think I'm going to watch the game," he said. "Want to join?" "I have to finish up some work," I said. "You go ahead." I went back to my office and continued my research. I looked into offshore accounts, asset protection trusts, and property transfer laws. I consulted 3 different lawyers via encrypted emails, not mentioning names but explaining the situation in general terms. I needed to understand exactly what my options were and how to protect what I had built. The truth was, I didn't just want to divorce Michael and move on. That felt too simple, too easy for him. He had spent 3 years lying to me, manipulating me, waiting for his payday. He had made me doubt myself, feel ashamed of my body, question my own worth. His mother had treated me like dirt, and he had encouraged it. They had laughed at me together, called me a fat hippopotamus, discussed my fortune as if it were already theirs. I wanted them to feel what I felt standing in that hallway. I wanted them to understand what it meant to have everything taken away. I wanted justice, real justice, not just a divorce settlement. For the next week, I moved carefully. I went to work every day, managed my properties, met with contractors and investors. At home, I was the same attentive wife I'd always been. I cooked, I cleaned, I made small talk. Michael suspected nothing. Why would he? In his mind, I was stupid and desperate, grateful to have him despite his obvious lack of attraction to me. But behind the scenes, I was dismantling everything. I hired a corporate lawyer in New York City who specialized in business restructuring. I met with my accountant and discussed reorganizing my company's financial structure. I contacted an old colleague who now worked in international real estate development. Every conversation was carefully documented, every decision strategic. I also hired a private investigator. His name was Richard Evans, and he came highly recommended by Valerie. I gave him one job: follow Michael and document everything. I didn't know what he would find, but I had a feeling there was more to uncover. Men who lie about one thing usually lie about everything. Richard called me 3 days later while I was at a property inspection in the West Loop. I stepped away from my foreman and took the call. "You need to see this," Richard said, his voice grim. "Can you meet?" We met in a coffee shop an hour later. Richard was in his late 60s, with gray hair and a professional manner that made you trust him immediately. He slid a manila folder across the table without preamble. Inside were photographs. Michael with a woman I didn't recognize. Michael kissing her in front of a hotel. Michael entering an apartment building with her. The photos were time-stamped and dated. They went back 14 months. "Her name is Jessica," Richard said. "She's 26, works as a receptionist at a dental office. He's been seeing her since about 6 months after you bought your house. The apartment is his. He rents it through a shell company and pays in cash. She doesn't know he's married." I looked at the photos and felt that strange numbness again. It should have hurt more. It should have destroyed me. Instead, I felt strangely validated. This was who he really was. This was the truth behind the act. "There's more," Richard said. "I did a background check on his finances. He has significant gambling debts, about $150, dollars, spread across 3 different casinos. He's been using cash advances from credit cards you don't know about. Your name isn't on them, but he's been paying the minimums from the household account you give him access to." I looked up from the photos. "How much has he taken?" "About $25 over the last year. Small amounts. Nothing you would notice, but it adds up." I closed the folder and sat back. "Keep following him. Document everything. I want to know about every lie, every debt, every secret. Can you do that?" "Absolutely," Richard said. "What are you planning?" "I'm planning to make sure he never underestimates anyone ever again," I said. That night, I lay next to Michael in bed and watched him sleep. He looked peaceful, content, like a man without a care in the world. He had no idea his carefully constructed plan was about to come crashing down. He didn't know that the fat, stupid woman he was using was 10 steps ahead of him. He thought he was the predator, but he'd made a crucial mistake. He had underestimated his prey. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a conference room in downtown New York City with 3 lawyers, my accountant, and Valerie. The view from the 42nd floor was spectacular, but I barely noticed. I was focused on the documents spread across the mahogany table in front of me. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," I said, looking at the lead attorney, a woman named Julia Morgan who specialized in asset protection. "If I restructure my company this way, convert my personal assets into business holdings, and establish the trust you're recommending, everything becomes untouchable in a divorce." "Not entirely untouchable," Julia said cautiously, "but significantly more complicated to access. Your husband would have to prove that these moves were made in bad faith, specifically to defraud him in a divorce. Given that you aren't filing for divorce, that you are simply restructuring your business for legitimate reasons, and that the prenup is still in effect, he would have a very difficult case." "What about the house?" I asked. "The house is an interesting one," Julia said, pulling out another document. "You bought it 2 years ago in your name alone. It's protected under your prenup. However, if you want to ensure there is absolutely no argument about marital appreciation of the property, you could sell it and reinvest the proceeds into the trust before the prenup expires." I glanced at Valerie. We'd discussed this possibility, but hearing it laid out so plainly made it real. Selling the house meant moving out, making a visible move that Michael would notice. It meant the game was truly beginning. "How long would it take?" I asked. "In this market, with a property like yours, 2 to 3 weeks if you price it right," Julia said. "We have connections with several realtors who specialize in fast, discreet sales." My accountant, George, leaned forward. He was 68 and had managed my finances since I started my company. He'd seen me build it all from nothing, and he was royally pissed when I told him what Michael was planning. "Eleanor, I've run the numbers every which way," George said. "What Julia is proposing is entirely above board. You're reorganizing your business structure to prepare for an expansion, which you were already planning. The trust is a standard estate planning tool. Selling the house and relocating for business reasons is logical, given the new development opportunities downtown. None of this is unusual for someone in your position." "Except that it will leave Michael with nothing," I said. "It will leave him with exactly what he contributed," George corrected, "which is nothing." I thought about the photos Richard had given me. Michael with Jessica, laughing, kissing, playing house in the apartment he rented with money he stole from me. I thought of Margaret's cruel laugh, of being called a fat hippopotamus, of 3 years believing in a love that never existed. "Let's do it," I said. "All of it. How soon can we start?" "Today," Julia said. "I'll have the paperwork ready by tomorrow morning. The trust can be established in a week. The company restructuring will take a bit longer, but we can start the process immediately." We spent the next 3 hours going over every detail. I signed preliminary documents, authorized George to begin transferring assets, and approved the business reorganization plan. By the time I left New York, the wheels were in motion. I drove back to Chicago, feeling strangely calm. The city lights blurred past as I crossed the bridge over the Chicago River. Somewhere in that city, Michael was probably with Jessica, lying about working late. Or maybe he was at home, playing the devoted husband, waiting for his payday. It didn't matter anymore. He had already lost. He just didn't know it yet. When I got home at 9:30 p.m., Michael was on the couch watching television. He looked up when I came in, surprised. "You're late," he said. "Where were you?" "New York," I said, putting down my briefcase. "Business meeting. I texted you this morning." He looked confused, checking his phone. "Oh, right. Sorry, must have missed it. How'd it go?" "Very well, actually," I said, and that was the truth. "I'm restructuring the company, expanding into some new markets. It's going to mean some changes, but good ones." "That's great, babe," he said, already turning his attention back to the television. He didn't ask for details. He didn't care about my business unless it affected his bank account. I went upstairs, took a long shower, and lay in bed thinking about the next steps. Richard had continued his surveillance, and the reports kept coming. Michael's debts were worse than we originally thought. He owed money not just to casinos, but to loan sharks. He had borrowed from friends, from his brother, from anyone who would give him cash. He was drowning, desperately waiting for the divorce payday to bail him out. The affair with Jessica was serious. Richard had recordings of Michael promising her they'd be together soon, that he was just waiting for the right time to leave his wife. He told her I was cold and distant, that our marriage was over in all but name. He played the victim, the poor man trapped with a woman he didn't love. I'd been angry at first, then hurt. But now I felt a strange kind of clarity. Michael wasn't a person to me anymore. He was a problem to be solved, a mistake to be corrected. I had spent 3 years trying to be enough for him, changing myself, doubting myself, putting up with his mother's abuse because I thought that's what love required. I had been so wrong. The next morning, I called a real estate agent I had worked with before, a sharp woman named Vivian who handled high-end properties. I met her at a coffee shop near my office. "I need to sell my house," I said bluntly. "Fast, quiet, and for a good price." Vivian didn't even blink. "When you say fast, what's your timeline?" 2 weeks, 3 max, and my husband doesn't need to know until the papers are signed." She smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "I heard you might be making some changes. Valerie mentioned you might need some discreet help. I have 3 buyers who have been looking in your neighborhood. All cash offers, quick closings. When can I see the property?" "Today," I said. "Michael plays golf every Thursday afternoon. Be there at 2. Vivian arrived at 2 on the dot, along with a photographer and a staging consultant. They moved through my house efficiently, professionally, taking notes and pictures. I watched them appraise the home I had so carefully chosen, the place where I thought I would build a life. Now it was just another asset to be liquidated. "You've kept it beautifully," Vivian said as we stood in the master bedroom. "The renovations you did last year have really added value. I'm confident we can get $3, $2 million, maybe $3. 3? The market is strong right now." "How fast can you move?" I asked. "I'll have the listings ready by tomorrow, but I'll start with my private client list first." No public listing unless we have to. I should have offers by the end of the weekend. She was right. By Saturday morning, I had 3 offers. 2 at $3, $2 million, 1 at $3, $3 million. All cash, all willing to close in 2 weeks. I accepted the highest offer and signed the contracts at Vivian's office that afternoon, while Michael thought I was at a property inspection. When I got home, he was in the living room with Margaret. They looked up when I came in, and something in their expressions made me pause. They had been talking about something serious, and I had interrupted. "Eleanor," Margaret said, her voice dripping with fake warmth. "So good to see you. I was just telling Michael we should all have dinner next week, a proper family meal." "Sounds nice," I said, wondering what they were really planning. Margaret had never suggested a family dinner before. She usually preferred I didn't exist. "I'll cook," Margaret continued. "At my place next Saturday night, 6 o'clock. You'll come, won't you?" There was something challenging in her tone, as if she expected me to refuse, as if she wanted me to refuse so she could use it against me later. "Of course," I said. "I'll be there." After Margaret left, Michael was quieter than usual. He kept looking at me with an odd expression, like he was trying to figure something out. That night in bed, he rolled over and put his arm around me, something he rarely did. "You seem different lately," he said. "More confident or something. What's going on?" My heart hammered, but I kept my voice steady. "Just excited about the business expansion. It's a huge opportunity." "Yeah, about that," he said. "I was thinking maybe I should get more involved. I mean, I haven't been working for a while, and I know the business pretty well now. Maybe I could take on a real role, not just as your husband, but as a partner." There it was. He was getting nervous. Something had spooked him, made him want to secure his position more firmly. I wondered if Robert had said something, or if Margaret had planted the idea. Either way, he was trying to attach his name to my business before the prenup expired. "That's sweet," I said, turning to face him in the dark. "But you know, the company structure is pretty set. All the partnerships are formalized. It would be complicated to add someone new, even you." "But I'm your husband," he said, and I could hear the tension in his voice. "Shouldn't that count for something?" "It does," I lied. "It counts for everything. But business is business. You understand that, right?" He was silent for a long moment. "Yeah," he said finally. "I guess so." But I could feel the tension in his body, the suspicion beginning to grow. I would have to move faster than I'd planned. The next week was a blur of activity. I signed the final closing documents on the house on Tuesday. The new owners wanted possession in 10 days, which meant I had to pack and find a place to go. I told Michael the company had leased a temporary corporate apartment downtown for me to use during the expansion project, that it made more sense than driving back and forth every day. "What about me?" he asked, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. "The apartment's tiny, just a studio," I said. "You can stay here until I figure out our permanent situation. It's only temporary." He didn't like it, but what could he say? I was supposedly working around the clock on a major business project. It made logical sense. He had no idea the house had been sold out from under him. I started moving my personal items out gradually. Clothes, jewelry, important documents, family photos. I was careful not to take everything at once, just enough that it wasn't obvious. I moved it all to a storage unit first, then gradually to the furnished apartment I had actually rented, a beautiful 2-bedroom in a secure downtown building overlooking the Chicago River. Richard continued his surveillance. Michael was getting more desperate. His gambling addiction was worsening. He'd lost another $25,000 in the past 2 weeks alone. He was borrowing from Margaret now. I found out she'd given him $50, year 00 just 3 days ago, likely expecting to be paid back when he divorced me and got his settlement. On Saturday night, I drove to Margaret's house for the family dinner she had arranged. It was a sprawling old colonial in a ritzy part of town, inherited from her late husband. Michael had grown up there, in that cold, formal house filled with antiques and judgment. Margaret answered the door wearing pearls and a strained smile. "Eleanor, you made it. Come in, come in." The dining room was set for 4. Michael was already there, along with Robert and his wife, Sophie. I hadn't realized they would be joining us. Sophie was a quiet woman who always seemed slightly terrified of Margaret. I felt sorry for her. We sat down to roast beef and potatoes, and Margaret immediately started her usual routine of subtle insults disguised as concern. "Eleanor, dear, have you been to the gym lately? You're looking a bit tired," she said, passing me the vegetables while taking the smallest portion for herself. "I've been busy with work," I said pleasantly. Of course, your little business projects. It's nice that you have something to occupy your time." She said it as if I ran a hobby shop instead of a multi-million-dollar company. Robert chimed in. "Actually, Mom, Eleanor's company is doing really well. Michael was telling me about a big expansion she's planning." Margaret's smile tightened. "Yes. Michael mentioned something about it. Sounds very risky, though. Wouldn't it be wiser to focus on stability at your age? You're not getting any younger." I was 34. She made it sound like I was ancient. "Sometimes you have to take calculated risks to grow," I said. "That's how I built the business in the first place." "Well, thank goodness you have Michael to keep you grounded," Margaret said, reaching over to pat her son's hand. "He was always so sensible with money, weren't you, darling?" Michael smiled at his mother, and I saw the same coldness in his eyes that I had heard in his voice that night outside the bedroom. This was what he had learned from her. This casual cruelty, this belief that some people just mattered more than others. The dinner continued with more of the same. Margaret made remarks about my appearance, my age, my business decisions. Robert and Sophie stayed mostly silent, and Michael played the devoted son, agreeing with everything his mother said. I smiled and nodded and played my part perfectly. After dinner, Margaret suggested the men retire to the study for brandy while we women cleaned up. It was so antiquated and ridiculous I almost laughed, but I followed her and Sophie into the kitchen. "I'm glad we have this time alone," Margaret said as she handed me a plate to dry. "I wanted to talk to you about something important." "What is it?" I asked, though I had a feeling I knew where this was going. "Michael," she said simply. "He's seemed unhappy lately. I think this marriage is taking its toll on him." Sophie shot me an apologetic look but said nothing. She had learned long ago not to cross Margaret. "I haven't noticed him being unhappy," I said carefully. "Well, you wouldn't, would you?" Margaret said, her voice turning sharper. "You're so focused on your work, your money, your properties. When was the last time you really looked at your husband and thought about what he needs?" I put down the plate I was drying and turned to face her fully. "What exactly are you saying, Margaret?" She met my eyes with absolute confidence. "I'm saying that perhaps it would be kinder for everyone if you recognized that this marriage isn't working. Michael deserves to be with someone who appreciates him, who puts him first. And you, well, you clearly prefer your business to any relationship. Maybe it's time to part ways amicably before anyone gets hurt." There it was. She was setting up the narrative. When Michael filed for divorce after the prenup expired, they would claim I was a neglectful wife, that I had pushed him away with my obsession with work. They would paint him as the victim and me as the cold, selfish woman who deserved to be left. "That's an interesting perspective," I said calmly. "But I'm not planning on divorcing Michael. I love my husband." Margaret's expression flickered with something like anger before she smoothed it over. "Of course you do, dear. I just think you should be realistic about the situation. Michael has his whole life ahead of him. He shouldn't be tied to someone who can't give him what he needs." I knew what she meant. Children. Michael had mentioned wanting kids early in our marriage, but I'd said I wanted to wait until the business was more stable. The truth was, I was never sure I wanted children, and I'd been honest about it. Now Margaret was using it as another weapon, another piece of evidence that I wasn't good enough for her son. "Well, thank you for your concern," I said, my voice still pleasant. "But Michael and I will figure things out on our own." We finished cleaning up in silence. When we went back to the study, Michael and Robert were laughing about something, and I saw the way Michael's face changed when he saw me. The laughter died, replaced by that polite mask he always wore around me. On the drive home, he was quiet. I was quiet too, thinking about Margaret's words, about the trap they had so carefully constructed. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I had no idea what was coming. "My mom means well," Michael finally said as we pulled into the garage. "She just worries about me." "I know," I said. And I did. I knew exactly how much Margaret loved her son, enough to help him plan to destroy someone else's life for money. That night, I stayed awake long after Michael had fallen asleep. My phone buzzed with a message from Richard. He'd found something new, something big. I read his text 3 times, feeling the pieces of the puzzle click into place. Michael's gambling debts weren't just personal anymore. He had taken out loans using my properties as collateral. Not the real properties, but forgeries. He had created fake documents showing that I had agreed to secure his debts with my real estate holdings. The loans totaled over $500,000, and the loan sharks were starting to press for payment. If those fake documents came up in a divorce, even if they were proven to be fraudulent, the legal battle would be expensive and messy. Michael would claim he thought he had my permission, that we'd discussed it and I'd forgotten. He would muddy the waters enough to drag out the proceedings, maybe force a settlement just to make it all go away. It was brilliant in a sick way. He had created leverage, an insurance policy to make sure he got paid even if I tried to fight the divorce. But he'd made a crucial mistake. He had committed fraud. Real, documentable, prosecutable fraud. And I had proof. I screenshotted Richard's text and saved it to my encrypted drive. Then, I sent a text to Julia in New York. "We need to talk first thing tomorrow. Emergency." When I finally fell asleep around 3 a.m., I dreamed of clear water and open skies. I dreamed of freedom. The next morning was Sunday. Michael slept late while I made coffee and sat in the kitchen, waiting for Julia to call me back. She called at 8 a.m., sounding concerned. "What happened?" she asked. I told her about the fraudulent loan documents. I could hear her typing quickly as I spoke. "This changes things," she said. "This is criminal fraud. We can use this." "How?" "We can file a police report, but more importantly, we can use it to nullify any claims he might make in a divorce. If he comes after you for anything, we threaten to prosecute. He'll walk away with nothing to avoid jail time." "I want more than that," I said. "I want him to understand what he did. I want consequences that actually matter." There was a pause. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking I'm done playing nice," I said. "I'm thinking it's time to end this." The closing on the house sale was scheduled for the following Thursday at 10 a.m. I told Michael I had a full day of meetings, kissed him goodbye as I always did, watching him settle back into bed with his phone. He had no idea that in 3 hours, everything would change. I met Vivian at the title company's office downtown. The buyers were a young couple who had made their fortune in tech, eager and pleasant. They smiled as we signed document after document, transferring my beautiful home to them. $3 million moved into my account, then was immediately wired to the trust Julia had established. The whole process took 45 minutes. "Congratulations," the closing officer said, shaking my hand. "When will you be moving out?" "I'm already out," I said. "The property has been vacant as of this morning." It was mostly true. I'd moved the last of my personal items out yesterday while Michael was at his brother's office. The furniture would stay. That was part of the deal. But everything that mattered to me was already gone. I drove to my new apartment and changed into something comfortable. Then I sat down at my laptop and began the final phase. First, I sent an email to Michael's phone. The message was simple. The house has been sold. The closing was this morning. You need to be out by 5 p.m. today. The new owners are taking possession tomorrow. Next, I sent a second email with attachments. Photos from Richard's investigation. Michael with Jessica. Michael at the casino. Michael meeting with loan sharks. And finally, copies of the fraudulent loan documents he had created using my properties as collateral. The last email was the longest. I had written it carefully over the past week, revising it until every word was perfect. Michael, I know everything. I know about Jessica. I know about the gambling debts. I know about the fake documents. I know what you said to your mother about me, about how you find me disgusting, about how you're only in it for my fortune. I heard you that night, 3 weeks ago. I heard every word. For 3 years I believed in us. I changed myself trying to be enough for you. I put up with your mother's cruelty because I thought that's what family meant. I supported your dreams, your choices, your complete lack of ambition because I thought I loved you. But it was all a lie. You married me for money. You waited for the prenup to expire so you could divorce me and take half of everything I've built. You lied to Jessica, to me, to everyone. You stole from me. You committed fraud using my name. Here's what's going to happen now. The house is sold. The money is in a trust you cannot touch. My business has been restructured in ways that completely protect it. Every asset I own is secure. You get nothing because you contributed nothing. Your debts are your problem. Your lies are your problem. Your fraudulent loan documents are your problem. And if you ever try to use them in any legal action against me, I will have you arrested for fraud. I have proof of everything. I have recordings, photos, documents. I have witnesses. You can file for divorce whenever you want. I don't care about the prenup anymore, because there's nothing for you to take. But if you, your mother, or your brother ever try to cause me trouble, ever try to harm my reputation or my business, I will destroy you. I will press charges. I will make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. You wanted to play games with someone's life. Congratulations, you lost. Do not contact me again. My lawyer will be sending the divorce papers. I hit send on all 3 emails, then blocked his number. Then I blocked Margaret's number, then Robert's. I blocked them on social media, on every platform I could think of. I erased them from my life as completely as if they had never existed. My phone started ringing almost immediately. Michael's name flashed on the screen. Even though I'd blocked him, he was calling from Robert's phone. I declined the call. He called again and again. I turned my phone off. I sat in my quiet apartment and felt nothing but relief. It was done. 3 weeks from the night I'd heard those words outside my bedroom door, and it was completely, finally over. Richard called my work line an hour later. "He's at the house," he said. "He's freaking out. The new owners just showed up with their contractor to start planning renovations. And Michael is trying to explain that there's been some mistake. The police are there now." "Good," I said. "Let me know if anything else happens." "Eleanor," Richard said, his voice gentle. "You did the right thing. I've been doing this job for 30 years, and I've seen a lot of bad people. What he did to you, what he planned to do, it was calculated and cruel. You protected yourself. That's all." "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. I spent the rest of the day working. I had conference calls with contractors. I reviewed blueprints for the new downtown development. I met with Valerie to discuss project timelines. The work was comforting, familiar. It reminded me who I was underneath all the hurt. That evening, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. It was from Margaret. "You vengeful, selfish woman. How dare you throw my son out with no warning? How dare you destroy his life over some misunderstanding? Michael loves you. He has always loved you. You are just too bitter and insecure to see it. You will regret this. You will spend the rest of your life alone, and you will deserve it. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Julia with a note to add it to the file. Then I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at my apartment window, looking out at the city lights reflecting on the river. Chicago looked beautiful from up here, clean and bright and full of possibility. The divorce papers were filed on Monday. Julia had worked through the weekend to prepare everything, and they were ironclad. The prenup was still in effect for another year and 7 months, which meant all my premarital assets remained mine. The business restructuring was complete, removing any ambiguity about my company. The house sale was documented and legal. There was nothing for Michael to claim and nothing for him to fight. His lawyer called Julia on Tuesday. I was in a meeting when she texted me. They want to negotiate. I told them there's nothing to negotiate. He gets 0. I texted back. Good. On Wednesday, Richard sent me his final report. Michael had moved in with Robert and Sophie. He was still calling my office, leaving desperate voicemails that my assistant was instructed to delete without listening. He had tried to get a loan to pay off his gambling debts using his mother's house as collateral, but Margaret had refused. The loan sharks were circling, and he had no way to pay. Jessica had found out about me. Someone had sent her newspaper articles about my company, along with our wedding photos. She had confronted Michael at Robert's house, screaming at him on the front lawn while the neighbors watched. Then she posted about it on social media, calling him a liar and a fraud. The post went viral in local circles, shared and commented on by hundreds of people. Margaret tried to do damage control, calling mutual acquaintances to spread her version of events, that I was the crazy, jealous wife who had snapped and thrown her innocent husband out, that I was vengeful and cruel, that Michael was the victim. But the story didn't stick. Too many people knew me, knew my reputation for integrity and fairness, and too many people had seen Michael for what he really was, a charming man with no substance who had married up and gotten lazy. Valerie called me Thursday afternoon. Did you see the Chicago Business Journal today? No, why? There's an article about your downtown development project. It's glowing. They interviewed several city council members who praised your company's community engagement and ethical practices. There's a quote from the mayor calling you one of Chicago's most valuable business leaders. I pulled up the article on my computer. It was everything Valerie had said and more. There was a sidebar about my company's growth over the past 10 years. There was a picture of me on a construction site, wearing a hard hat and pointing at blueprints. I looked confident, capable. Nothing like the woman who had stood in the hallway 3 weeks ago, listening to her husband call her a fat hippopotamus. Did you arrange this? I asked Valerie. I may have mentioned to a reporter friend that you were doing something groundbreaking in urban development, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. The rest wrote itself. You're seriously impressive, Eleanor. It was about time people remembered that. That evening, I met my lawyer at her Chicago office to sign the final divorce documents. Everything was ready to be served to Michael. The marriage would be dissolved in 6 months, the standard waiting period. He would receive nothing, no money, no property, no alimony. After 3 years of marriage, he would walk away exactly as he had come in, with nothing but the clothes on his back and the debts he had accrued. He signed the acknowledgement, Julia said, sliding a document across her desk. His lawyer advised him to just accept the terms rather than fight. I think they realized how bad the fraud charges would look if this went to court. I looked at Michael's signature, a scrawl at the bottom of the page. And Margaret, has she tried anything else? A few more emails, some phone calls to the office, nothing actionable. She's angry, but she's smart enough to know there's nothing she can do. Her son lied to her too. Remember, she gave him $50 unknown dollars based on his promises about the divorce settlement. Now she's lost that money with no way to get it back. Good. I knew I should feel guilty about that, about Margaret losing her money, but I didn't. She raised a son who saw people as resources to be exploited. She encouraged his cruelty, laughed at his jokes about my appearance, helped him plan to take everything I had worked for. She deserved every consequence that came her way. I signed the final documents and stood to leave. Julia walked me to the elevator. "You handled this perfectly," she said. "A lot of people in your situation would have stayed, would have convinced themselves it wasn't that bad. Or they would have reacted emotionally, done something rash. You were strategic and patient. You protected yourself and your assets completely." "I learned from the best," I said. "Thank you for everything. Thank you for trusting me. And Eleanor, I know this was terrible, but you're going to be fine. Better than fine. You're going to thrive." I believed her. For the first time in 3 years, I truly believed I was going to be okay. 6 months later, I was sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Chicago with Valerie, going over plans for our next project. The downtown development was ahead of schedule and under budget. The city council had approved our proposal for a second phase. My company had grown by 30%, and I'd hired 10 new employees. "Heard anything about Michael?" Valerie asked, sipping her latte. "Richard sent me an update last month," I said. "He filed for bankruptcy, lost everything. He's working at a car dealership now, living in a tiny studio apartment on the east side. Margaret won't speak to him. Apparently, she blames him for losing her $50 US and for the gambling debts. He's on a payment plan. It'll take him years to pay them off. Robert fired him from the insurance brokerage after the incident with Jessica went viral. His reputation is pretty much shot." Valerie was silent for a moment. "Do you feel bad about it? About how you completely dismantled his life?" I thought about that question. I had asked it of myself many times over the past few months. The answer was always the same. "No," I said. "He tried to do the same thing to me. The only difference is I was smarter and faster. If I had waited, if I had trusted him for a few more months, I would have lost everything. He would have divorced me right after the prenup expired, taken half of what I built, and walked away feeling like he'd earned it. He would have destroyed me without a second thought." "Fair enough," Valerie said. "You know what I think? I think you're a woman who knows her own worth now. That's worth more than any revenge." She was right. The past 6 months had been hard, but they had also been clarifying. I started therapy to process the betrayal and the years of putting up with Margaret's cruelty. I joined a gym, not to lose weight, but because I wanted to feel strong. I reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with during my marriage. I remembered who I was before Michael, before I made myself small, trying to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be. My business was thriving. My reputation in Chicago had never been better. I was asked to be a keynote speaker at a Women in Business conference next month. I was invited to join the boards of 2 different nonprofit organizations. I was building the life I had always wanted, the one I had put on hold while trying to be someone's wife. The divorce was finalized 3 weeks later. I didn't attend the hearing. Julia represented me, and the judge signed off on the dissolution without comment. I was single again, free and unencumbered, with everything I had built still intact. I celebrated by doing absolutely nothing. I stayed home, ordered takeout, and watched old movies in my comfortable apartment. It was quiet and peaceful, and I realized that this was enough. I didn't need anyone else to complete me. I never had. Richard sent me one final update on Michael a month after the divorce was finalized. He had moved to another state, somewhere in the rural Midwest, trying to start over where people didn't know his story. Margaret sold her house and moved to Florida to live near Robert and Sophie. The family had fractured completely, each one blaming the others for how badly their plan had failed. Jessica had moved on too, dating someone new and posting happy pictures on social media. I'd felt bad for her initially, but she had bounced back quickly. She was 26 and resilient. She would be fine. As for me, I was more than fine. I had taken everything that was meant to destroy me and turned it into fuel. I learned that I was stronger than I ever imagined. I learned that I didn't need someone else's approval or love to be valuable. I learned that revenge, real revenge, wasn't about hurting someone else. It was about protecting yourself and refusing to be a victim. On a late summer evening, I stood on my apartment balcony, watching the sunset paint the river gold and orange. My phone buzzed with an email from my accountant. The trust I had established had grown by 15% through careful investments. My net worth had increased by almost $2 million since the divorce. Everything Michael had tried to steal, everything he had schemed and plotted for, I had kept and multiplied. I thought about that night outside my bedroom, hearing those cruel words. That fat hippopotamus disgusts me. I'm only in it for her fortune. At the time, those words had nearly broken me. Now they just seemed pathetic. He had been so confident, so certain that I was too stupid and desperate to see what he was doing. He was wrong about everything, about my intelligence, about my strength, about my worth. He had underestimated me completely, and it had cost him everything. I raised my glass of wine to the sunset, to the river, to the city that had watched me rebuild myself. I had survived the betrayal, the humiliation, and 3 years of emotional abuse disguised as a marriage. I had come through it all stronger, wiser, and completely free. Michael spent the next 2 years struggling to rebuild even a fraction of what he'd lost. The bankruptcy followed him everywhere, making it impossible to get credit or find decent employment. His gambling addiction, untreated and enabled for so long by his expectations of easy money, only worsened under the stress. He bounced from job to job, town to town, always one step ahead of his debts and his reputation. Margaret, bitter over her lost investment and humiliated by her son's public failure, cut him off completely, refusing to even take his calls. Robert and Sophie distanced themselves as well, tired of being associated with the scandal. Michael ended up exactly where he'd always feared he would be, alone, broke, and irrelevant. Living proof that trying to steal someone else's life only ensures you lose your own. As for me, I built something real. Not just a business, but a life that was entirely my own, free from manipulation and cruelty. I learned that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so completely yourself that the people who tried to diminish you become irrelevant. I looked back on that night in the hallway, at the woman I was, standing there hearing those hateful words, and I felt gratitude for her. She was strong enough to stay quiet, smart enough to plan, and brave enough to walk away from everything that was familiar to protect what mattered. That version of me saved us both. I'm so glad you're here and that I could share my story with you. If you liked it, show some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Let's see how many of us there are. Tell me in the comments what city you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm always so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from. If you want to support me a little more, you can also send a small contribution. I bring new life stories every day just for you. And now, 2 of my most popular stories will appear on the screen for you to choose what to watch next.